Hello and welcome to the Sunday 9th November edition of Proud Malcontent. I am Pete Bell and I am a Proud Malcontent. Straight into it today because we have a lot on. I'm going to start off today by showing a video of the presentation, the speech that I made at the Independence Forum Scotland Autumn Convention in Glasgow yesterday, just for the sake of those of you who haven't seen it. The entire day's proceedings are available online, and I will provide a link to that as usual on the blog site, on my Substack blog. After the show, once the show is uploaded to Substack. Then after that video, we'll get straight in. And as usual on a Sunday, we'll be joined by Stephen Duncan. And this week, he's addressing the question, whatever happened to Yes SNP? Right. I can almost feel the draft of hackles rising as I say that. Anyway, we'll see what that brings out. For the moment, I'm going to show you this video.
And I thank the IFS for inviting me here today. And I'd like to say a special wee thank you to William, not just because he's an old pal of mine, William Dugan, but because he did such a wonderful job of keeping us all informed in the months and weeks leading up to this event. So big thanks to folks there at the mind tricks. As I imagine most of us are thinking of the 2026 Scottish general election. I have an important piece of information regarding that event. March 2026 is not March 2011. Everything is different. Everything has changed. Thanks to the likes of Alf Baird, Sarah Sawyers, and Liberation Scotland, our understanding of Scotland's constitutional situation is different. Thanks to such as Richard Murphy, Tim Rideout, and the Scottish Currency Research Group, our appreciation of Scotland's economic situation is different. Thanks to organisations such as IFS and the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, our perspective on the nature of Scotland's cause and the means by which it might be resolved has altered dramatically since 2011. Everything is different. And yet, John Swinney assures us that all we need to do to achieve independence is rerun the 42 months between March 2011 and September 2014. He is wrong. He's horribly and disastrously wrong. He's wrong in far too many ways for me to recount now. But I did not come here to attack John Swinney or the SNP or any of the other nominally pro-independence parties. And I'm sure that's not what you want to hear anyway. There is a reason I mentioned John Swinney and his notion of replaying the past. It is to illustrate the point that in order to craft a credible strategy to achieve any political goal, it is essential to know the starting point. Scotland's struggle to restore our independence is often likened to a journey. We speak of roots independence. plan a journey, you need to know as precisely as possible where you're setting off from. Our starting point is not March 11. Our starting point the starting point for our journey is March 2026. Planning the journey, you obviously know the destination. It's good to know where you're going. We talk of independence being our destination, but that's not quite correct. Strictly speaking, our destination is the place where the sovereign people of Scotland exercise our inalienable right of self-determination. It is then for the people to decide to go on to independence or not. Independence is the aspiration, a proper constitutional referendum destination. Given that access to the means by which the sovereign people of Scotland exercise their inalienable right of self-determination is rather a mouthful, I think we may be forgiven for using the term independence as shorthand. But sometimes pedantic is good. Sometimes it reveals things not conveyed by the shorthand term. So the question is, how do we get from where we are now to that proper constitutional referendum? Now, I speak of a proper constitutional referendum as opposed to a Section 30 referendum, which is nothing like a proper constitutional referendum. In a proper constitutional referendum, the people have the final word. In a Section referendum, Westminster has the final word. There are other differences, but that one alone rules out the Section 30 process. Says here, you'll find more detail of what comes in the handout I've prepared. You won't, because my printer ran out of ink before I could print them. I do have handouts. Our starting point is Scotland as annexed territory of England as Britain, effectively a colony. You may dislike my use of the word colony, but when all the characteristics of a colony are present and all the criteria for a colony are met, I challenge you to find a better term to describe our constitutional status. We have a devolved Parliament and government. The Parliament is best thought of as the original Parliament of Scotland, which was taken from us by nefarious means in 1707. In 1999, that Parliament was returned to us, but it was returned to us in chains, the chains of devolution. To make the devolved Scottish Parliament once again the Parliament of Scotland, we must cast off, we must strike off the chains of devolution. That is where we are. A nation with a parliament which is bereft of the essential powers of a national parliament because those powers are withheld by the colonizer. And because our government meekly accepts the colonizer's asserted authority to withhold those powers. Those powers were taken from us. We must take them back. Power is never given. Power is only taken. That which is given is not power, but an affirmation of the power of the giver. We must take back our government, we must take back our parliament, and only then will we take back our nation. The most fundamental of the powers that are illegitimately over constitutional affairs. The proper constitutional referendum that is our destination can only be reached by way of an act of the Scottish Parliament. There can only be such an act of the Scottish Parliament if the Scottish Parliament possesses the appropriate legislative competence. The Scottish Parliament can only acquire this legislative competence by taking it. Power is never given, power is only taken. When planning a journey, as well as knowing your starting point and destination, it's helpful to have information which allows you to choose the most efficient route. You want to know which places are unavoidable and how to get through them, and which places you would be better to avoid if possible. You want to know where the best travelling conditions are and where delays or obstacles might be encountered. And in planning your route, you want to be clever about it. Scottish UDI is an attempt to map out the best route from where we are to where we want to be. Just like an itinerary for an actual journey, the Scottish UDI route map can be broken down into stages, which can then be broken down further into sub-stages. These stages and sub-stages need be neither consecutive nor separate. They may overlap. Some stages may be simultaneous. Some stages are critically dependent on the progress of other stages. They're presented as a sequential list for convenience. Before continuing, I should point out that this plan has been in development for about 6 years. It started with myself and Jeff Bush back well before the 2021 Scottish general election, when we had a little Facebook group called SNP Members for Independence. We're cheeky that way. Before continuing, I should point out that this plan has been in development for about 6 years. It has evolved over that time. You may find that what I described is slightly from earlier versions that you may have encountered. Plans must adapt to changing circumstances as well as new information and new knowledge and a new understanding of our situation. So I shall now set out as concisely as I can, Ian, the basic stages of a Scottish UDI process. 1. Repudiate the Section 30 process as an illegitimate constraint on the exercise by the people of Scotland of our right of self-determination. It is necessary to repudiate the Section 30 process for a number of reasons. Because it has been promoted so vigorously as the gold standard of democracy, and it definitely isn't that. Because it is wrong. If we adhere to the principle that the people of Scotland are sovereign, then there can be no effective veto on the democratically expressed will of the people, and no external control over our access to the means by which the people express their will. I just note at this point that something Greg McCarthy said that the SNP have tagged on your right to decide to their leaflets. That seems like a kind of a last minute thing. But as so often happens, you'll be familiar that there's very often in politics there's this gulf between rhetoric and reality. And while they talk about your right to decide, they also acknowledge Westminster's right to overrule your decision. So don't be fooled by a simple phrase like your right to decide. It's also necessary to repudiate the Section 30 process in order to eliminate one of the or a possible challenge to this process by the British. Return to that point later. 2. Declare one or all future Scottish elections to be a plebiscite on the question of legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament to facilitate the exercise of Scotland's right of self-determination. You can stand up and cheer now, Mike. You like that bit. This would mean, for example, that the 2026 Scottish general election would also be a plebiscite with the aim of generating a mandate for the Scottish Parliament to take to itself the legislative competence necessary in order to hold a proper constitutional referendum. By doing this, we move the constitutional issue into the realm of human rights, with us occupying the high ground. I could say a lot more about that, about this being a human rights-based approach. I don't have time. To make an election, which is inherently non-binary, work as a plebiscite, it's necessary to introduce a binary element. This can be done by having all pro-independence parties adopt a common manifesto commitment on the Constitution and manifest independence. That commitment being to this process. A vote for any pro-independence party thereby becomes a vote in favour of following all the stages that I am outlining. 3. Assert the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament in matters pertaining to the Constitution on the basis of its democratic legitimacy and the sovereignty of Scotland's people, citing the fact that this is the only way the people of Scotland can be enabled to exercise our human right of self-determination. This is where I return to what I was saying earlier about the need to repudiate the Section 30 process. If the Section 30 process is accepted by the Scottish Government as a valid means of our exercising our right of self-determination, then the British state, in mounting a legal challenge to the Scottish Parliament asserting legislative competence as described, can claim that this is redundant because there exists a formally recognised way for the people to exercise their right of self-determination. As well as the fact that if John Swinney gets his way, the Scottish Government will have acceded to the sovereignty of Westminster and hence denied the sovereignty of Scotland's people. Most of you will surely have realised that this is where the Scottish UDI plan starts to work in tandem with the initiative at the UN by Salvo Liberation Scotland. There's a lot more to be said on that matter too, but time does not allow. 4. Recall Scotland's members of Parliament from Westminster to sit on a national convention established by the Scottish Parliament, along with members of the Scottish Parliament and such representatives of civic society as are deemed appropriate by the Scottish Parliament, for the purpose of drafting a bill of dissolution to include a draft interim constitution for Scotland, provisions for a confirmatory referendum, and such other matters as shall be deemed appropriate by the Scottish Parliament. 5. By way of a bill of dissolution introduced to the Scottish Parliament, propose dissolution of the Union with England, subject to approval by the Scottish Parliament and ratification by the people of Scotland in a confirmatory referendum that stands as the formal exercise by the people of Scotland of our inalienable right of self-determination. 6. Assuming the bill of dissolution becomes an act of the Scottish Parliament, a referendum on the question of ratifying the act of dissolution. Said referendum to be held according to provisions set out in the Act of Dissolution, including that it be held under the auspices of the Scottish democratic institutions, subject to oversight by the National Convention, such other bodies as may be appointed by the Scottish Parliament, for example, a Scottish Electoral Commission. Only after passing through these stages can the campaign for independence begin, as the independence movement mobilises to persuade the people of Scotland to approve the Act of Dissolution. I am firmly persuaded that this fight will in a conclusive manner. A date will be set to be forever celebrated as Scotland's Independence Day. We will have a party and we'll set about the task of fully decolonising Scotland and repairing the ravages wrought by 3 centuries of subordination, degradation and exploitation. The Scottish UDI process ends with a beginning. Thank you. I mentioned that I had some, I thought it was going to be a Q&A, as I'm not on the call later. Since there's not a Q&A, I'll just try.
Sorry, I was supposed to finish with the applause, but my shaky hands didn't get to the button in time. I'm not going to say very much more about that or very much more about yesterday's proceedings. I suspect that there'll be a lot of discussion prompted by yesterday's proceedings at the IFS Autumn Convention. So I will leave that till then. If you only have time to watch parts of the video, it was a 6-hour day, so a few of us have 6 hours to spare to sit and watch the whole thing. But for me, one of the more interesting parts of it, and there was a lot of interesting stuff, I have to say. I mean, Jim Osborne on pensions, always worth a listen. But specifically for yesterday's, Aileen McHarg, Professor Aileen McHarg, her presentation was particularly interesting. Now, I think a lot of people will find it surprising that I find so much to agree with in Professor McHarg's presentation of the legal aspects of our route to independence. I find a lot to agree with. People will find that surprising. I am happy to explain, just not right now, because right now we have to go over and be joined by Stephen Duncan for today's Confute Corner. And Stephen, how are you today?
Very well. How are you doing, Peter?
Okay. Hearing you now, we obviously have about a second flag there, which is going to make conversation difficult. I was going to ask you, I know you watched some of the IFS convention yesterday. You watched some of the live stream. Just in general, what did you think of it?
I thought it was great. I saw your speech. I made sure I tuned in for that, and then obviously Craig Murray followed you. So I watched both of these bits back to back. I thought they complement one another quite well. And Craig comes out from a slightly different angle with his background, but he certainly referenced you, I think, when he's making his speech, and I think he certainly is in favour of the you didn't call it UDI, but effectively it's the same thing. If you declare independence, as long as you are independent, if other countries recognise you as being so. So I think it was quite. These two bits were quite good. I watched a bit of the Jim Osborne earlier on. Very knowledgeable. It is quite a dry subject, but perhaps need to take that in smaller bites. I think. Certainly, I would. Maybe other people can sit through it all. It was quite very detailed. He's obviously done an awful lot of work on it. Maybe I just need to, think about that a bit longer and take it in stages.
Right. I have to say that the quality is not that great, Stephen. But I'm going to bash on with the presentation, and which is a subject that's likely to provoke a lot of comment. The question you're looking at today is whatever happened to the SNP. So over to you, Stephen.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. I hope you're able to hear some of it. In any case, here, what we're looking at is we know that support for Scottish independence and the Scottish National Party were once considered one and the same. This presentation takes a look at how the movement and its parliamentary wing, if you like, have drifted apart in recent times. So what we're looking at here is the two charts we're looking at is from a time series from Find Out Now, the opinion pollster. On the left-hand side, it's we've got yes as the dotted line, black dotted line, versus voting intentions at the Holyrood election on the constituency. On the right-hand side, it's the same information, except it's on the region. And there's some, these are different snapshots at different periods in time. So if we take the left-hand chart and the leftmost bar, the yellow bar is the voting intention on the constituency for SNP. You can see that's at 50%. And the independence at that time point, which was March 2021, just before the Holyrood election in 2021, was 52%. So very close alignment at that point in time, between the SNP and yes sentiment. In fact, when you put the Greens in, the SNP and yes and Greens together is slightly higher than the yes support in total. Then if you jump to the rest of the other four bars are from 2024 or December 2024 onwards, and it should jump out at you that there's a very large gap now developed in that 3.5 year period from March 2021 to December 2024 and thereafter between the SNP support and yes. And even when you add the other pro-independence parties, and normally pro-independence parties of ALPA and the Scottish Greens in, there is still a significant gulf between the two measures. Roughly, it's 20 to 25 points between the SNP and yes, and it's a bit less once you add in, about 10 points less once you add in the other two parties. So what you can see is that that whilst the ALPA party and the Scottish Greens are offsetting filling in part of the gap between SNP and yes, they are not taking up the slack entirely. There's still a sort of a gulf there, and it seems to be indicating that some of that yes party political support, if you like, has moved away, perhaps moved into the ranks of the disillusioned, the non-voting, or the abstainers. So mind the gap. Is that clear on that graph?
I have to say I wasn't totally paying attention there, Stephen, as I was concerned with the the audio, and it turns out your audio is actually okay. The problem was here. The problem was my cheap wee speaker that I use for this. I had the volume turned up, but for the sake of the speech, I had the volume turned up, and it was too much for the speaker to handle. And the whole situation was not helped by the fact that the speaker had been knocked on its back during it was setting up. So entirely my fault, Stephen. But I could hear you loud and clear. Well, I have no questions at this point.
Okay.
Carry on, Stephen, please.
Good. Right. Let's take a look at some of the demographics. So what we're looking at here, again, on the left-hand side, you've got constituency voting intention versus yes. On the right-hand side, it's region voting intention versus yes. And this information comes from Find Out Now. It's a combination of both September and October opinion polls this year that they released. So very quickly, we've got a split between male and female on the left-hand chart for constituency. You can see that there's quite a gulf between, whether it's male or female, and yes, it's 32% for the SNP for males, 35% female, and it's 49% and 58% respectively for the two sexes. So a big gap has developed there between yes and SNP. Whether or not it's male or female. A significant amount of that gap is filled in for females with them transferring their support to the Greens, and that's even more pronounced on the right-hand chart in the region, where you've got yes at 27% for females, 21% for the Greens, 4% for ALPA. But overall, a big gap. When you look at the age profile of that, just about every sort of age cohort, age category, younger than the baby boomers, that is people who are probably born post 1964, there's a big gap to the yes support. And take a look at where the yes support is at its greatest level. That's those that are under 30, age between 16 and 29, and age between 30 and 39. The support for yes is 63% and 73% respectively on the constituency. For SNP, it's only 25 and 39%. It's almost double on the 30 somethings, if you like. It's almost double. The yes support is almost double what the support is for SNP. Some of that is filled in, significant amount on the Greens, even more so by the Greens, and even more so on the regional support, where you've actually got more Green support for the 16 to 29-year-olds than you have SNP support, 26% there versus 20%. It's really only the baby boomers and older, so those people born before 1965, they're the only ones that are really particularly loyal to the SNP, if you like, where you can consider yes and SNP, or the pro-independence parties as an aggregate. You can be considered one and the same. Any questions on that, Peter?
There's some interesting stuff in there about changes with women. Maybe you could summarize that. I'm sorry, my attention has been broken here today, so I'm maybe not formulating these questions very well. I do apologize, Stephen, but there seems to be I get a sense that there's something interesting happening with the women in particular in this. Am I correct?
Well, maybe we could put it back up again. We'll have a look at that if it's possible, Peter. I think it's more. I think you've seen there's a bigger transfer of their if they have a less affinity with the SNP, they've got a proportionately greater affinity with the Greens. So on the constituency, you've got their support at 35% for SNP and 14% for the Greens. If you look at the males, it's 32%, roughly the same, but only 6% of males are supporting the Greens on the constituency. If you look at the region, it's 27% female, 21% Greens, and 22% for males for the SNP, and 11% only, half, for the males. So what's happening is the females seem to have a greater affinity with the Green Party than what males do when they're if they have a less support for the SNP than what they once had. They're transferring more in relatively more numbers than what the males are.
Right. I'm just wondering how much of this transfer to the Greens, this increased support for the Greens, and right. I'll get accused of sexism for this. How much of this is the new leader effect? I've forgotten his Polanski effect. Or does the data that you're using predate Polanski? So we have to look for another explanation. Obviously, a new leader can prompt significant changes in patterns of support, especially if he's very popular and getting a lot of media exposure. So it's not sexist to imagine that it's it's a factor, and I don't know, maybe it is sexist to assume that women are more susceptible to this factor. Your comments, Stephen?
Well, political hot potato. I haven't looked at it. I think there are questions on the leaders. I haven't looked at that. But what I would say is that Polanski he's the English Green Party, or the Green Party of the Green Party of England and Wales. I think it's a combined effort. Whereas in Scotland, they do have new leaders, but of course it's the co-conveners, isn't it? Ross Greene and the lady, is it Gillian Mackay? So they're new, of course, as well. But I think I think this has been around for a while. It's not. I say for a while, certainly the last year. But so that predates the change in leadership, whether it's south of the border or whether it's here.
Right. I was just curious if there was some sort of connection in there. But I would just comment that the fact that Polanski's the leader of the Greens of England and Wales, the Green Party of England and Wales, because of the amount of publicity he's getting, there's this normal overspill into Scotland's politics. I wonder if there's, I wonder how large a sector of the population actually think Polanski is just the leader of the Greens and not making the distinction, which is, of course, getting us back to this cultural imperialism and its effects. But that's another subject.
Okay. Right. So move to the next slide, which I find the most interesting of all, most intriguing. So there's 8 very small charts there, and I'll do my best to chat you through them. There's a sort of three dimensions to this sort of comparison. It's a comparison again between Yes and SNP support, and all, on the one hand, and Yes and all the nominally pro-independence parties support. On the top 4 chart, well, first of all, the black line is the Yes support. The yellow line is SNP support. The reddish line is all the independence parties aggregated. That's their support. The top 4 charts look at the period 2020 to 2022. And these are opinion polls along the x-axis, and obviously the support for Yes and the support of the voting intentions on the y-axis, the vertical axis. And at the bottom 4 charts look at the period 2023 to 2025 to date. So if we start working from left to right at the top, So that's the constituent. The first chart on the top left-hand corner is on the constituency, and what we're seeing there is a very close overlap between yes support and SNP at that time. If you move to the right, you see there's a similar pattern between yes and all of the independence parties in that same period on the constituency. On the region, the next chart along, there's a little bit of a gap there, and I think that's, you can probably imagine that being to do with the separation of the votes for Alpa and Greens on the region, because when you add Alpa and the Greens back in on that rightmost chart, fourth chart along at the top, you can see the gap has narrowed again, and the lines are sort of very close to one another. You can see there's another statistic quoted on that on all the charts. It's called the correlation coefficient. Now, don't want to go into the technicalities of that, but what it's endeavoring to do is to check how these two lines move together, either in the same or in the opposite direction. It's looking at the strength of the association between these two measures, yes, and voting intention, and how and what the nature of that relationship is. So when you've got a correlation coefficient of, just in summary, if you've got a correlation coefficient of 0, that indicates there's no relationship between the two measures. If you've got a correlation coefficient that's close to 1, that means that's close to being a perfectly linear relationship, very closely associated, and in the same direction. So if yes goes up, the SNP and pro-independence support would go up in equal measure. If the correlation coefficient is -1, it's a very strong relationship, but in the opposite way, that if yes went up, SNP and the independence support would go down in the same sort of proportions as it were. So dropping down, that said, if we drop down and look at the second time period, which is 2023 onwards.
Sorry, Stephen, that was a very clear explanation of the correlation coefficient. Even I understand that, but these are very small charts. You have figures for the correlation coefficient. Could you maybe
Sure.
state those figures for people like myself who are having difficulty seeing these charts? I'm looking at this on a small monitor here.
Okay.
So if you could maybe just talk us through that.
Okay, so the correlation coefficient on the top left-hand chart, which is the initial time period, 2020 to 22, the correlation coefficient is 0.72. Now that's considered to be quite a high positive correlation. I've got a little ready reckoner. It's a very small table on the right-hand side. It's got a set of rules of thumb, if you like. Anything above 0.7 or anything 0.7 to 0.9 is considered a relatively strong measure, and above 0.9, that's very strong relationship. If you're somewhere between 0.5 and 0.7, that's moderately strong, and anything 0.3 and below is considered a weak relationship. So the top charts, as we said already, we can see how closely, just by eye, these two lines are and how they seem to move together. On the constituency, yes and SNP support, the correlation coefficient is 0.7, so that's a strong relationship. For the yes and the pro-independence on constituency in that time period, it's 0.71, very strong. The other two charts is 0.55 and 0.59 respectively on the region, and so that's moderately strong. You could consider that to be the case. It's quite different when you drop down to the second time period, to the bottom four charts. you can see there's quite a large gap has developed between Yes and SNP. That's one thing, the gap we've talked about before. Also, the similarly between Yes and pro-independence, the reddish line, whether you look at the constituency or the region. The correlation coefficient, which again doesn't measure the gap, it measures how these lines move together. Are they somehow related? Are they associated in some fashion? On the leftmost chart, the correlation coefficient, there's two things to observe about that. It's small, it's 0.25, and it's negative. So the nature of the relationship has changed. That tends to, what that indicates is, it's if there is any kind of relationship there at all, it's a negative relationship. So the Yes moves up a little bit, SNP moved down, and vice versa.
Sorry, Stephen, remind me, the second time period is what?
23 to 25.
23
so from January
to
23 to date.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah, sorry, I'd forgotten about that. So this is pretty up to date.
Yes, this is right up to the last opinion polls that were released last month, and this is a North Star time series. I should have mentioned that at the top. It's on the slide there. Yeah, so that's what it is. And if you look at the correlation coefficients on the other charts, minus 0.18 on the constituency when you look at Yes versus the pro-independence parties sentiment altogether, and then on the regions it's minus 0.06, no relationship at all on the first chart, which looks at the SNP to Yes, and then on the final chart looking at the aggregated pro-independence voting intention versus Yes, it's minus 0.22. So there's a weak relationship there in the relationship seems to have been broken in the second time period. It's certainly an altered relationship, both in terms of the nature of that relationship and the strength of that relationship. That's what that correlation coefficient is telling you. So you've got a gap in between, SNP and Yes, and even the pro-independence parties and Yes, whether it's the constituencies in the region. And secondly, you've got a relationship that's now changed quite dramatically. And they're both 2-year time periods. Just to give you some indication, there's 19 polls in the top chart. There's 16 polls in the bottom chart. So a significant number in both sets and almost the same amount.
This looks to me, Stephen, as if it's a symptom or an effect of the disillusion with politics in general, or party politics, and disillusion with the nominally pro-independence parties, where the people are moving away from the parties. Yeah. They're staying with Yes, but they're moving away from the political parties. Would that
That's
be?
What it looks.
Yep.
That's what it looks like to me, and there may be some specific triggers for that. The sort of for that happening, and sort of like the last straw. And there were a few things that happened at the end of 22 and beginning of 23 that may have really accelerated that process. I think we were seeing it before, but I think something happened, and I've got that on the chart there. What I'm supposing happened at the beginning of 2023 or at the end of 2022, which has made that gap much larger and has broken that link between Yes and political party support for the nominally pro-independence groupings in Parliament.
Right. Yeah. That's
so
interesting.
That last point of just what looks to have happened, to me at least, is that if you remember at the end of 2022 in December, late into December, there was the big controversy around the gender recognition reform bill, and then in January, February, we had these sort of scandals about the female prison estate with biological males being housed in that, and that was all over the press. Nicola Sturgeon then resigned, and I think I think from that people probably got a bit scunnered with that, a bit sickened by that, and the lack of action on the the Scotland's cause as well may well have played into that since as well.
Yeah, this is speculation, of course, but there is some kind of a correlation there. Whether that's causation or not is open to question, but
Yep.
there is a correlation there. It seems commonsensical to assume that it's over that period that there was such turmoil with gender recognition, well, self ID. In particular, and with changes in the leadership, that didn't help. You can pretty safely assume that didn't help. Yep, yeah, this is all interesting stuff. So we're at the stage where the parties and the Yes movement are drifting apart, and that seems to be an accelerating process.
I believe so. Yeah, that's what it looks like. If you look at the charts, you can see the gap between the black and the yellow line, the black and the reddish line, are are getting wider on this time series. It's quite clear if as you move from left to right on the bottom charts, the gap's getting bigger. So we'll just move quickly to conscious of the time. Just move on to the conclusion. Whatever happened to the S&P? Well, it's clearly no longer a sort of unified. They're no longer one and the same. That link has been broken. The gap is real, sizable, and I think growing. And I think the fault lines probably developed in the first time period. With all the trials of Alex Salmond, the launch of the Alpha Party, but the schism, the big schism, if you like, happened, the end of 22, beginning of 23. And it's, as I say, it's continuing to grow. These are my thoughts on what's actually caused that. And the void that has been created has not been filled by Alpa and the Greens. To some extent, they've taken up the slack, but there's still a big gulf there. There's more people joining the ranks of the disenchanted with the political parties. And we've got a changed relationship. Before 2023, there was a strong positive relationship between Yes and the parties, particularly the SNP. Thereafter, that relationship is inverted, and it's much weaker if it's a relationship at all. I strongly suspect that the inaction in Scotland's cause has a lot to do with that as well.
That impression, thank you, Stephen. That impression is somewhat strengthened by the fact that we're not seeing a move to the other nominally pro-independence parties. It's not as if people are changing from the SNP to the nominally the Greens and Alpa. They're not changing camp. They're leaving political parties out of it altogether. Am I correct in that interpretation?
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. There's a lot of people moving into the non-voting sort of camp from looking at this stuff previously, and some people will be considering voting reform.
I'm making a point of this because it's another tell ye moment for me. Because I've long maintained that whereas the SNP and the old guard Yes movement in general, the old guard of the independence movement, with particular Gordon McIntyre Kemp as an example, they're still sold on this vision thing, and it's not working. They're not drawing people in. The parties are not drawing people in, and that is where this is the point that I was trying to make. That is where the additional votes that we need for the Yes movement. That's where the additional support lies. It's these people who have walked away since. Since 2014, 2015, 2016, actually, but it's possibly only showing up more recently in the 2020 to 25 period. I think it actually started before then, and it seems. Sorry.
Well, certainly, you know, if you look at the votes that the SNP got in the 2015, just making your point, 2015 British general election, something like just under 1.5 million, 1.455 million, I think, and you know, they got, you know, that's in the 2024 election they got 724,000. That's, you know, it's almost half, you know, of where they had been, you know. So there's 730,000 people have no longer vote for the SNP. They haven't all died.
Right. I wouldn't. Oh, well, we hope not. It kind of makes a mockery of the idea of the SNP as a party of independence. And I have to stress at this point, this is not an anti-SNP thing. I mean, to be anti-SNP is kind of silly to my mind, because they're there and they're the dominant political party. Being anti-SNP is just it's just a bit silly. It is merely noting what appears to be the fact, what is indicated, that in the public perception, the SNP has ceased to represent independence.
In the public perception, it would seem that way. Not in the media perception. They still insist on that, and certainly down south of the border, they still think it's one and the same thing, or they'd like you to believe it's one and the same thing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there, Stephen. The media still make this, and British politicians in general, still basically they only mention in the SNP as in political party terms. They only ever mention the SNP. For them, SNP and independence movement are synonymous, so. But that is not the reality on the ground. No. So it just shows this massive gulf between how the media present Scottish politics and the reality of it. All interesting stuff, Stephen, but we're almost running out of time. And given that today is the day that it is, I don't want to risk running past 11 o'clock. So I'm going to say thank you for the moment, Stephen, and we'll see you again next Sunday, okay?
Will do. All right.
Bye just now. Right, folks, like I say, I don't want to risk running over to 11 o'clock because, you know, the whole minute silence. I've got to respect people who want to do that, and I don't want to interfere. We've had a few comments, including from Gordon Henderson, who says the cabal must go. Always succinct and to the point, our Gordon, and yeah, they must go. If they can't change, then they must go. Then we get the question of what is going to replace them. And earlier we had a comment from Peter Craig, the man who shouts, and he says that is saying that Scotland's sovereign people are wasting their time voting in any government. Well, as far as the independence movement is concerned, as far as Scotland's cause is concerned, the political parties actually don't hold very much for us. Nominally pro-independence parties just aren't offering us anything, and that explains the findings of Stephen Duncan's research this week. And now I have to say goodbye until Wednesday.